that desert was such powerful medicine for me. And hard, powerful medicine. I don't know that I would be alive if I hadn't come there.
Hi, and welcome to the Desert Lady Diaries podcast, a weekly conversation with women who found their home in the Mojave Desert. I'm Dawn Davis, and this is episode 114. If you'd like more information about the podcast, it's all at the website desertladydiaries.com, and I invite you to engage with the guests, with other listeners, or me on social media, on Facebook and Instagram at Desert Lady Diaries, or on Twitter at Desert Lady Diary. A former resident of Yucca Valley, Mary Sojourner began to write professionally in 1985 after what seemed a century of being a divorced mom. She drove west from a Great Lakes city, from wet gray and green to the huge skies and sacred mountains of Flagstaff, Arizona. She went as a promise to herself to write and fight for the earth. Her writing, 3 novels, 1 short story collection, 1 essay collection, 2 memoirs, dozens of NPR commentaries, and hundreds of magazines and newspaper columns served that vow. Mary moved to a ragged little town in the Mojave Desert in 2008 after a series of losses that had taken her down to the bone, and she returned to Flagstaff in 2011 and has lived there ever since. Mary gets back to the Mojave as often as life will allow to visit. Welcome to the podcast.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you.
So what was your first experience with desert?
Claustrophobia.
Oh, no.
Eons ago, I think I'm thinking 1982, a partner that I was with at that time, and I drove out through the Mojave, right through J-Tree and Yucca Valley and to Los Angeles to a conference or something. And bet that we were between Parker and 29 on 62, right? 62?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And I thought, oh my God, I can't breathe. Oh my God, where am I? You know, oh help, I can't see anything from me. I was and it oddly felt claustrophobic. It felt like there was nowhere to be safe. And that was my first experience of the Mojave. I hadn't had any other real desert experience before then. And somehow driving through, we must have driven through Arizona. It didn't have the same effect. There were no houses, there were no gas stations, there was nothing. And I was a city girl, very much a city girl, city woman, excuse me. So that was my very first experience.
When was it that you decided, I'm going to go and move to the Mojave Desert?
I was living in Flagstaff, Arizona, and it was 2007. I was living in Flagstaff, Arizona in 2007, and Flagstaff was changing, and it was changing in the same way that many rural mountain towns in the West were changing. So that people were coming in with money, they were building huge houses, they were buying out small businesses and putting in their own versions of it. This, mind you, was in 2007. And I lived in a cabin with no running water, with a wood stove. I shared a shower house and an outhouse with other people who lived in the same cabin complex. And the landlord, along with everybody else, got greedy and sold the property. And it was going to become damn near impossible to live there. And so at about that time, I met a woman from the Mojave Desert Land Trust who brought me over to Joshua Tree to do a writing workshop and a reading. Susan Lang, who I'm sure everybody's familiar with, she and I did a joint reading. And this woman put me up in the little homestead cabin next to her house. And I came out in the morning, I had my coffee, and I was sitting on a bench, and I wasn't really aware that I was looking at the Marine base, but I was. And the sun was warm on my face, and there was desert as far as I could see. There was sky. There was room. And I fell in love, and I made the decision, and 3 weeks later, I think I moved into that homestead cabin.
Wow.
Which became a challenge.
Well, that's interesting that the first time you passed through here, you had that sense of claustrophobic. And this time when you came here, was there any of that happening?
No.
Interesting.
And it hasn't happened since. I mean, I get over to the intersection of Avalon and Winters Road, where you go to the landfill. I get over to that spot 3 or 4 times a year, and I get out of the car and I stand there, and it's one of the few times I feel whole. I think maybe, as are many people at this point, I feel battered by all the ugly stuff that we humans are doing on the planet. I just feel pummeled by it. And Flagstaff has become Scottsdale. It's become charming. It's become overpopulated.
The place everybody wants to be.
Yeah, it's awful. And some of that's the fault of the local university, who keep taking in more and more and more students. But it's also out-of-town developers and greed. I mean, we're being killed by greed. The planet is being killed by greed. And so when I get over to that road to the landfill, and all I can really see are Joshua trees and little bitty homes that have been there forever, and the sky, I can have for a moment the illusion that I'm safe, and that the planet's safe. I know better than that, but it's still...
You still have the feeling.
Yeah. And that to me is the Mojave. Or the Mojave in that area. I just consistently have felt blessed by it, even in incredible heat, because I lived on Yucca Mesa for a year, and I remember I had tarps over the windows, with the reflective side out, because I didn't want to run the air conditioner. But I remember that the moment, usually at about 4 p.m, when the air would start to cool a little bit and the sun would be at a different angle, and I'd go sit in my front yard and just feel enormous gratitude to the desert. So, yep.
I think a lot of us who live here feel that. And it's a place where you can come if you are having some kind of, something's happening in your life that you need to, I don't know if shed's the right word, but you need to sort out. And I think the desert becomes a really interesting place to do that, because as the land is very sparse, it strips away any pretense, it strips away any masks that we have, it strips away any thoughts that we have that anything that we're doing is really appropriate, and makes us listen to ourselves and our own voices, whereas other places we have the distractions of city life and that sort of thing. So I think that's part of what the desert offers.
Well, I think more important than listening to what's inside of me, I mean, I've been doing that for eons, is I learned how to listen to the earth. I learned how to, I'm not really clear what that process is, and I feel blessed that it has come to me. But I walked probably, I'm not even sure, a 25 square mile, 5 miles by 5 miles chunk of Yucca Mesa so many times in the year I lived there that I would walk across my own tracks. I would see tracks and I would recognize that they were mine. And I think even to me, even the stuff that blew over from the landfill was magical. And I've written about that. My novel 29, which is set, oddly enough, in 29 Palms and also up on the Mesa, I talk about that. I talk about not looking at a screen, just wandering up a wash and not being able to stop walking, even though it was incredibly hot, because I just kept finding stuff. I'd go around a curve and I'd go around another curve, and I am so grateful to have had that experience. I ultimately left because I'm an older woman and I've never handled heat well. And so the summers just became too much, the heat and the glare, because I have some eye stuff. But I miss the area so much. I'm a writer and I teach writing, which means I have very little income. But if I had income, I would spend, who wouldn't? I would spend autumn and winter and early spring, probably up on the Mesa if I could.
Yeah. It's an amazing place. When you moved here, had you already started writing?
Oh, I've written for eons. Okay. Yeah, I have three novels, and my first novel was published in 1985. Sorry if I sounded a little condescending there. No,
I'm just trying to get my timeline right.
No, you're good. I moved west in 1985 from Rochester, New York, and I moved to write and to fight for the earth. I had read Edward Abbey's The Monkey Wrench Gang. He made so much sense to me. So I moved in 85, and since then, as I said, I've done 3 novels. People can go on The Evil Empire. They can go on Amazon. I have a page there, and they can see all my books. So lots of books.
Well, in your bio, we said that you moved with a promise to yourself to write and fight for the earth. So let's first talk about the fight for the earth. What was it that drew you to Flagstaff, and what were you fighting for there?
Oh my gosh, so much. I mean, we are talking about 35 years of my life, essentially. I fought to stop a uranium mine 13 miles south of the Grand Canyon. We fought to get a pumice mine off the sacred San Francisco peaks. I've been engaged in the ongoing struggle to get the local punk ski resort to not make snow on the sacred mountains with reclaimed water. I stopped with a bunch of other people. We stopped a developer from putting a gated golf course atrocity around one of the last few ephemeral wetlands in the area in Arizona. Just tons and tons and tons of stuff. And at this point, my heart is broken because so much of the work we did has been undone. And recently, I drive a dirt road to get to where I live, and the Forest Service, in their infinite wisdom, claiming that they were thinning, essentially clear-cut the forest along that road to the west side of that road. And for those of you who feel connection, not to Earth, but with Earth, when I first saw that, I felt as though I'd been eviscerated. It was horrifying.
Yeah.
And they trying to track down who made the decision, all of that kind of stuff. Well, you live there. You know that Joshua Tree is constantly under threat.
Right. It's and I've only been here 3 years and I'm already exhausted. And the people that are here that just have been in this for, 30, 40 years.
That's right.
I don't know how, I mean, you just do it because you know it's the right thing to do. And you get out there and you either demonstrate or you get to a MAC meeting, the Municipal Advisory Council, you get to a Board of Supervisor meeting, you get to a land use meeting, or you hand off your comments to someone who can take them for you. Thank goodness for the Morongo Basin Conservation Association. They are all over that stuff, and the Mojave Desert Land Trust. But you're right, it's a constant assault, and it just makes you wonder, what is it? Is it just the desert that's experiencing this, or is it everywhere?
No. The most important question for any of us to ask politically is who profits. It's an old Roman saying, cui bono. Who profits? Yeah. No, this is all about the corporate capitalist economy. It's all about the gap between the very wealthy and the poor. Mm-hmm. It's all about the internet. It's all about Instagram and Facebook and the 8 million people that descended on those wild poppies in California.
Oh, right. Yeah.
That's what it's about. I just read that one of the mountain meadows here near Flagstaff had 11 times the visitation that it can support. There's a great line in The Matrix where I can't remember who, somebody says to Neo or something, humanity's a virus. We're worse than that. We're a cancer.
When I have visitors, and my brother was just here within the last couple of weeks, so we drove out to the Palms, out in Wonder Valley, and whenever I have anybody here that's never been to the Palms, I always pop up Kim Stringfellow's work on the Jackrabbit homesteads. And she interviews people like Pat Remington and Andrea Zattel and different people talking about the cabins and small space and the open space in the desert. And Chris Caraher, who has lived in Wonder Valley for a long time and owned a cabin, says something that always strikes me in the interview. She says, "Who is it that decided we could actually own a piece of the earth?"
Yep, exactly. Exactly.
And that just strikes me every time I hear her say it. It's like,
I think that we need to take a look right now at what drives people to have. What is that? When I first lived here, I lived over off Mesa, I think. And when I stayed in this homestead cabin, and I used to walk, and there were many, many abandoned properties out there. There were homestead cabins, there were houses, there was a ranch. And I'd go, and often you could go inside, and I'd go inside, and many objects were inside. They had not been looted. And at some point, I asked somebody, well, how come people left so much when they left their cabins? And it was a local person, and he said to me, honey, when you even got the price of cigarettes, you're going to leave. You're not going to take anything with you. You got enough gas to get yourself to San Bernardino, Huh. And it made sense to me. Well, about 2 or 3 years ago, I gave a talk for the book club, for Kip Fjell's book club at the Palms. And afterwards we talked, and one of the women, who was a newcomer, she said, you're going to hate this. She said, but part of what's happening, most of those cabins are empty now because the new people who've been coming in go in and take stuff, the charming stuff they use for their refurbished cabins or their little Airbnbs. And she said that they're being raided. And I don't get it. I don't get it. I don't understand why we have to have evidence of our having been somewhere. It's like rock stacking. It's the same thing. I was here, see my selfie. And the desert, I don't know. I'm trying to think what I was about to say.
Well, you were saying that we need to get to the root of what all of that is about.
Which is emptiness, I would gather. I would believe emptiness and cultural conditioning, and that more and more generations are growing up believing that all you have to do is do a click and you can have anything you want.
Yeah, instant gratification and
Yeah. So I'll be curious how many people bring their little groovy homesteading dreams to the area and then look up. This is what happened to me. I looked up, it was May 18th, and the time temperature clock in 29 was 118 degrees. and then the wind blew the windows off the homestead cabin I was living in.
Oh my gosh.
And that's but I suppose part of what's coming in is people with money are coming in. They have enough money to hire somebody to make everything all nice and safe and comfy. And that wasn't the Mojave when I lived there. Not at all.
No. It's kind of hard scrabble, very DIY, do with what you had. And, if it needed to be done, there really wasn't anybody to do it for you that you could hire. And I don't think the income brackets here were such. And, I do a lot of interviews with the ladies in 29, and they talk about their predecessors and how there was so much more community involvement. Like if somebody needed a well dug, 5 or 6 guys would show up and they would help that guy dig the well. And 3 weeks or a month later, somebody else needed it, they would show up. The women would show up with lunch or dinner to feed them. And now we're all in fenced yards. I don't want anybody seeing what I'm doing, and I don't need to see what anybody else is doing. I don't need to know my neighbors. It's a much different place.
Well, there is a beautiful book by Elizabeth Campbell, who was, I think, an anthropologist, archaeologist. She and her husband moved to 29, lived in a tent for a while. And in one of the chapters of the book, she talks about how 29 changed once roads went in, and that community spirit was lost. But when I got there in 2008, there were older women, 10 years older than I was, 10, 15 years older than I was, who were so generous-spirited, who helped me. I did a column for the Yucca Valley paper called From the Mesa, and a couple of the other women helped me and told me, this is what you need to do. You need to get lots of people's names in there. It's all very nice writing about the rainbow you saw, but you need to get people in there. And they were so generous-spirited. They were wonderful. So, yes. And the last 2 times I've visited, I see differences. I see changes. I see...
What kind of changes?
Commodification. A kind of hip commodification. And I talked about that at Kip Veld's book club. And there was a young couple there who'd come in. They were 30. They were living up in Landers. And they were working to enhance the sense of community in the area. And they called me out on what I was saying. And I'm sure that there are those folks coming in who are doing valuable things that are badly needed by the community. But I just think back to 2008, and I was absolutely living in poverty, and people took care of each other. That's what I remember. We didn't have to come get organized, and maybe that's just an illusion on my part, but what I have heard more of is that it's becoming impossible to afford rent, especially around Joshua Tree, that I see the ads for the Airbnbs. Talk about a plague on the earth. I see ads for the Airbnbs. Who can afford those?
Well, it's people many of them are from out of the area. Word got out to LA and Malibu and places like that about the price of the real estate here. And people said, I'm just going to go out and buy something. So that's right. It may turn out at some point in the next couple of years, because the new ordinances are going to be announced probably before the end of the year about what's required to have an Airbnb in an unincorporated area. There may be people who then see what the new ordinance is like and may decide, this is not what I thought it was going to be. This is not as lucrative as I thought it was going to be. They're going to have people that they need to get a permit that'll be good for 2 years. Of course, that's going to cost money and things like that. So there may be people then that say, you know what, this Airbnb thing isn't turning out like I thought it would. I'm going to turn my rental back into a long-term rental instead of a short-term rental. And I always say Airbnb, the original idea was fine. I've got an extra room in my house. Maybe my kid went off to college or whatever. I've got an extra room in my house. Maybe someone would be interested in renting it if they're visiting the area, kind of stay with a local. Not quite a bed and breakfast, but sort of. So that was the original premise of it. I've got an extra room in my house and I'll rent it out. Not I've got an extra house and I'll rent it. I call it the bastardized version of Airbnb. So
I'm afraid that's true. I think the other thing that happened for me, or the other experience that I had I was in a little studio tiny little place I left the homestead cabin and was living in a little studio on Yucca Mesa Drive. And what I'm so grateful for, so I started writing this book, and it was essentially an exorcism of a relationship where I kind of let myself be blindsided. But one of the things I realized, I was writing it, and I realized that there's no political point to this book. What am I doing? What's going on here? And about that time, I discovered that there was a guy in Blythe fighting solar power installations because they were being proposed for an area where there were these huge glyphs, these geoglyphs.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought, oh my God, what's that? And then I started exploring, and through the graciousness of some Chemehuevi people, I learned about their Salt Song Trail. I learned about really how to put it, almost the human underpinnings of the area, which I'm not sure there's a lot of general information about that. And actually, I don't know that one would want any, because then people are going to go on Instagram and try to find places on the Salt Song Trail when, in fact, the Salt Song Trail is in many ways more a spiritual entity than a physical entity. It is a physical entity.
Right.
But, weird. And as I say that to you, I think we're starving. Our species, especially entitled species, our species that has excess this, that, and that, we're starving. We're trying to find something that makes sense.
To fill up a hole that we've got.
Yeah.
Yeah, in some sense.
Exactly. So I'm grateful. I'm really grateful you're there. I'm grateful the land trust is there. I'm grateful that I wandered over there in 2008 and knew that was where I needed to be.
Right.
In a time that was almost the most anxious time I've ever lived through. And that I was able to come into contact with that desert, with those washes, with the Joshua trees, with the garbage that blows over from the landfill. It was a blessing. And it's a blessing every time I come over. So, and I don't have any answers.
No, I know. I don't think many of us do.
No.
And that's frustrating, but, that's life.
Well, I think that we also need to take a look at our current times, because the environmental work that I did years ago, it's much harder to do now. Much harder to do now. The other side, what she called it, Rowling, the Death Eaters or something like that, they're incredibly powerful and allied.
Well, and it's very difficult for people, just average people, to get involved and organize to do something because they're strapped to a job, they're strapped to the 9-to-5, trying to make ends meet. I mean, I look at the demonstrations that are happening in Hong Kong, where these folks are getting out and demonstrating for democracy, and the first thing I think about is, are they all students, or are they just average people who said, you know what, screw it, I got to get out there and make my voice heard and be seen? Because I think that's really what makes the difference, is when you can get people out and seen, that sometimes can change people's mind, but it's hard to do when, the Board of Supervisors meets during the week at 10 o'clock in the morning and you're at work.
Good point.
You know what I mean? It's hard to get involved.
I think we've also been seduced by the ease of click activism,
for sure.
I remember about 2 months ago, I wanted to get involved with a gun control organization. Mm-hmm. And so I went online and I'm trying to find real things to do and all that happened. And I'm not condemning the gun control organizations at all. I've had it happen with environmental organizations. All of a sudden, the only thing I'm getting are requests for donations. And that's kind of a symptom of the internet to me.
We're pretty fortunate still in this community that people will get out and demonstrate, whether it's on the corner by the saloon or up on the corner of Old Woman Springs Road and Highway 62.
Right.
Those things do get organized usually on a weekend, but that's okay. You know, people can come out. We recently are under a situation where a judge in Ventura County is attempting to relocate a violent sexual predator up to Copper Mountain Mesa. And
Yikes.
we had a sheriff's patrol go out and start talking to people in the neighborhood. And then they actually had a meeting, not this past Monday, but the Monday night before, over at the Sportsman Club. And the place was packed. People were out the door to pull that together. So there's a part of me, I mean, that's one of the things that attracted me to this community. I could just see, based on research that I did, that they were people that were going to fight for their desert, fight for their way of life, et cetera. And that was very appealing to me. So I'm grateful to be here and to be surrounded by people who are dug in like that.
When I spoke with Kip's book club, it was clear that every single person in the room was doing something active for the area.
That's wonderful.
They all told me exactly what they were doing, and it wasn't charming stuff. It was boots on the ground, gritty stuff. So, and I know you do too. So, I mean, I think I'm preaching to the choir, but I just, as I back up, the desert, that desert was such powerful medicine for me, and hard, powerful medicine. I don't know that I would be alive if I hadn't come there.
I think that's a great place to leave this.
Okay.
And great conversation. I mean, it went like lightning. And a lot of great information, because there are a lot of people who are outside of the area that either come to visit, stumble upon the podcast and start thinking about it. I've had people write to me to say that they are thinking about moving here, and it's really valuable to be able to share someone like yourself's experience with this place and how important it is. So I appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you. You're a great interviewer.
Thank you. Before I let you go, though, I would like you to select 4 numbers between 1 and 50.
14.
Okay.
11. 4. 26.
Well, you left them all on the one page for me. That was nice of you. I don't have to flip. Okay, and if this is your first time listening, I had Mary choose numbers because the questions that I'm about to ask her become part of the Diary Unlocked portion of the podcast, which is available exclusively to my Patreon supporters. And if you're interested in becoming a Patreon supporter of the podcast, please go to desertladydiaries.com, click on the support page, and select the Patreon option. So the questions that I will ask Mary to answer are: what was the last gift you gave someone? What do you work toward in your free time? What is your favorite kind of pie and why? And how do you define generosity? So again, if you're interested in hearing Mary's answers to those questions, or any of the guests that I've had since the beginning of the year, please go out to desertladydiaries.com and sign up to be a patron. Mary Sojourner, thank you so much. Mary's got a load of wonderful books out. If you look her up on Amazon, and I will be putting her links to her writing page in the show notes, if that's something you're interested in checking out, I will have it all there, either on the blog post or in the website. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Don. Thanks so much.
So I have a shout out to Stephanie B. Thank you so much for signing up for the weekly newsletter. If you want to sign up for the weekly newsletter like Stephanie B. and get the new episode in your email box every week, go to desertladydiaries.com and click on the newsletter button. Welcome, Stephanie. At the end of last week's episode, I mentioned that I took a deeper look at the survey results from the survey that I sent out at the end of the summer, and I am going to go ahead and share those results with you. In total, it'll probably be about 7 minutes. If you're not interested in hearing any of the survey results, that's cool. You can hang up now. Because that's all I'm going to be talking about for the rest of the podcast. It's been a fairly slow week. It's that kind of lull before the holiday season really kicks in, I think. So if you've been listening consistently each week, you'll remember that I asked for your feedback via a survey on the website. I wanted to round back with you on some of the results. The response rate was at about right, 10% of monthly listenership, which is actually pretty good as far as external survey responses go. And as it turns out, most responding to the survey have found the podcast through social media or searching online for desert podcasts. The majority of the respondents keep up with the podcast through Instagram. Twitter only came in at about 5% of respondents, so I probably won't be as active there moving forward. And each social platform has its little nuances about how to use it. And honestly, I'm just not that interested in going deeper into each of those places. So I know enough about the basic usage of each platform to be dangerous, and I'm okay with that. So I will continue to post that new episodes have come out on Twitter, but I find it difficult to engage there without spending a lot of time in there doing that. Where it's much easier, I guess, for me on Instagram and Twitter, or rather Instagram and Facebook, the rules are a little less cumbersome to me anyway. There was an overwhelming response to moving the podcast to an every other week release. 55% of you who replied said it would give you an opportunity to catch up on episodes, and 38% indicated they would miss it, but they would understand. No one replied that I would lose them as a listener, so that made me happy. 83% of you confirmed that the episode length is just right, while 5.5% said it was too long, and 11% said it was too short. 83% of you also listen all the way through to the end, so thank you for doing that. You indicated that I'm asking good questions. Some of you asked for some specifics around raising kids in the desert, the historical reasons that drew women here, the dangers of the desert, the hardest things about living here, how the guests reflect on their lives here, and how they understand their relationship to the environment, and to hear more about the Hollywood influence on the desert. I will be looking into those things and seeing how I can incorporate those into the interviews as we move forward. I do often get asked if I have merchandise, which is why I asked the question on the survey. Some of your suggestions were local art, items with local flavor, t-shirts, tote bags, bandanas, mugs, water bottles. I do have stickers, so if you would like to purchase those, go to desertladydiaries.com, click on the yellow donate button, which will take you to a page where you can donate through PayPal with a debit or credit card if you're not on PayPal. And I'll tell you what, if you donate $5 in the month of November, I will send a sticker and a button. Just make sure you put your mailing address in the memo portion when you're on there making the donation so I know where to send it. And speaking of donations, 10% responded they are supporting the podcast on Patreon. Thank you very much for that. 41% said they did know about Patreon, would like to support, but don't really understand it. And 23% of you said you didn't know about it at all. So that tells me I need to do a better job of getting the word out. So I'm thinking about the best way to do that, and we'll put something together. Someone also suggested that I inform libraries, students, and other institutions about the interviews. And to that point, you may or may not know that earlier this year, I entered into an agreement with the 29 Palms Historical Society. They currently have every single interview in their archive to date, and the file for each guest includes the guest's photo, the bio that they provided, the recorded interview, and a transcript. I've also recently reached out to the curator of the San Bernardino County Historical Archives, and after providing a link to listen and a list of suggested episodes, I'll be following up with them to gauge their interest. I also know some of you who listen live here and tell me that you learn so much more about a friend or neighbor when you listen. Some of you have visited the area and have reached out to let me know that the podcast is one of the ways you keep the desert spirit inside you alive. I love hearing that. Others listen because they have a sense that they may want to make a move to the desert and feel it's a good way to learn more about the area. And then there are others that are loving the conversations with our elders who talk about the history of the area and the changes that they've experienced in their lifetimes here. And hello, Norway. Yes, there is someone listening from Norway and over 31 other countries, actually, according to my SoundCloud analytics. So if you would have told me a podcast about women living in the Mojave Desert would have had a global reach, I would have said you were crazy. So all that said, I have decided to scale back to 2 episodes each month beginning in January. My Twitter engagement won't really change that much. I'll still post the episodes there, but probably less often. We'll still be interacting on Instagram and Facebook, though, so we can keep that going. And I'm also going to keep asking the first 2 questions about I am going to keep asking those first two questions about the guest's first experience with desert and then their first experience with this desert, but I will be revamping the general question sheet, I guess I'll call it. When I book an interview, I send a list of questions to the guest, basically to stir up any memories they might have or maybe stories that they can share that they haven't thought about in a long time. And I will be incorporating more of your suggestions into the questions that are in that document. So thank you for helping me out with that. And if you missed out on completing the survey or doing surveys is just not your thing, I hope that you know you're always welcome to send your feedback at any time to me at desertladydiaries@gmail.com. And last but not least, to my Patreon subscribers, you are awesome. And I appreciate your patronage so much. It makes me feel like one of those Renaissance artists who had patrons who commissioned their work. And I can't tell you how amazing that feels as an artist and as an archivist to have my work validated in that way. The survey responses indicated that you feel like you're receiving value for your contributions, and I'm glad to hear that. And somebody said that they don't think any other benefits or premiums would be necessary, so thank you. I hope you're enjoying those Diary Unlocked episodes. But if you do have suggestions for other premiums or benefits, please don't hesitate to reach out to me either through the Patreon site or send that email to desertladydiaries@gmail.com. And if you made it all the way to here, thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next week.